I like the story of that local bar that was sure that its bartender was the strongest man around, and they offered a standing $1,000 bet. The bartender would squeeze a lemon until all the juice ran into a glass and then hand the lemon to a patron. Anyone who could squeeze even one more drop of juice would win the $1,000. Many people had tried over time, but nobody could do it. One day, a little man walked into the bar wearing thick glasses and a polyester suit, and he said in a squeaky voice, "I'd like to try the bet." After the laughter died down, the bartender said, "Okay," and grabbed the lemon and squeezed away. Then he handed the wrinkled remains of the lemon to the little man. The crowd's laughter turned into silence as the man clenched his fist around the lemon, and 6 drops fell into the glass. The crowd cheered. The bartender paid him the $1,000 and asked the little man, "What do you do for a living? Are you a lumberjack, a weightlifter, or what?" The man said, "No, I work for the IRS." Well, today's gospel is all about a little man who worked for the IRS in Jericho. His name was Zacchaeus. What a wonderful story. It's really how Jesus came to seek and to save the lost. Zacchaeus was a lost sheep and Jesus the good shepherd. And it's in the Gospel of Luke, which is the Gospel of mercy. We have all those wonderful stories of mercy in the Gospel of Luke, the prodigal son, the good Samaritan, and now Zacchaeus from Jericho. What do we know about Zacchaeus? Well, we do know that he was from Jericho. Jericho is one of the oldest cities in the world, and at that time, one of the largest cities in the Holy Land, and certainly one of the wealthiest. And we find out that Zacchaeus was not just a tax collector, he was the chief tax collector for this large city. So obviously, he was a man of great wealth. It says here he was a wealthy man. So he obviously was at this for many years, being the chief tax collector. So based upon that, we would also figure that he was the most despised man in all of Jericho. Probably the most hated man in Jericho, because he was a chief tax collector. He was obviously of the Jewish faith, working with the Romans, working with the traders, taking money from his own people, giving it to the Romans, and then pocketing a great amount of it himself. That's what they were known to do. But he heard that Jesus was passing by, and he heard the commotion. He heard this almost a parade of the Lord with his apostles, hundreds, maybe thousands of people passing by. We also find out something else about him. It says he was short in stature. So I guess we would say today he was vertically challenged, as they would say today. So he could not see the Lord, and obviously nobody would let him through because he was so hated. They probably would keep giving him an elbow every time he tried to get towards the front as the crowd Jesus was going by. So he had a plan. He runs ahead and he climbs up a sycamore tree. If you go to Jericho today, you can still see sycamore trees lining that main road through Jericho. Now, sycamore trees last about 500 years. They can live about 500 years, so the ones in Jericho today are probably not the original ones, but if you go there, you can see what it looked like and see how somebody could easily climb up these kind of trees. So we could say that Zacchaeus was the first person ever to go out on a limb for Jesus. So he went out on the limb, looked like a little bird perched up in the tree. Really a humorous sight. And we have to think that Zacchaeus was being taunted by the people that would see him do this. Obviously, he was probably the wealthiest man in town. Imagine a governor or mayor climbing up a tree to get a look at somebody going by in a parade. It was really a childlike thing to do in a good sense, an act of humility. It was a humble thing for him to climb that tree. Because as you know, adults usually don't climb trees. Kids love to climb trees, but as we get older, we stop climbing trees. But remember what Jesus says, unless we are converted and become like little children, we cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. So Zacchaeus is willing to take a risk for Jesus, willing to even be a fool for Christ, and he climbs up in the tree just to see Jesus. What I think is so powerful about that is that he was still lacking something in his life. Obviously, he was the wealthiest man in town, but he wasn't completely satisfied. He wanted to see Jesus. He had this great desire. He was longing for more in his heart and his life. As St. Augustine wrote, Lord, you have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in God. So this inner craving of the human heart wanted to be fulfilled, so he wanted to see Jesus. So he up there, and Jesus passed by, and he stopped, and he called him by name. What a wonderful thought this is, that Jesus knows each of us by name. We're not some big crowd. Each of us is an individual. And when Jesus was dying on the cross, he thought about each one of us by name. He thought about each one of us from the cross. His divine mind could know us and knows us by name. So he calls him Zacchaeus. He tells him to come down quickly because he says, I'm going to come and stay at your house. So I always wondered what Mrs. Zacchaeus thought about this. Did she have time to clean the house? Did she have time to do the cooking? We don't know. But remember, when the Lord showed up, all his apostles came with him. So it was not easy when the Lord invited himself over for dinner. That's what happened at the wedding feast of Cana. Remember, it says the apostles showed up and the wine ran out. See, that's what happens when the apostles show up. But he came down quickly, scampered down the tree, and received Jesus, it says, with joy. Mother Teresa says joy is spelled J-O-Y for a reason. The J stands for Jesus, the O stands for others, and the Y stands for yourself. Mother Teresa says to have perfect joy, always put Jesus first in your life, put others second, and yourself third, and you'll have that peace and joy that only God can give. So Zacchaeus is now filled with joy, but now the crowd begins to grumble, and they are shocked and scandalized that Jesus has gone to the house of a sinner. What does Zacchaeus do? He has a conversion. He has a transformation. And notice what he calls Jesus. He doesn't call him teacher, rabbi, or master. He calls him Lord. Behold, half of my possessions, Lord, I shall give to the poor. That's a lot of money, being the wealthiest man in town, giving half of his possessions to the poor. What he's doing here, he's doing penance. He's doing reparation. And I shall, if I've extorted anything from anyone, I shall pay them back 4 times as much. I'm sure the crowd started to line up to get in line, hopefully to get reimbursed for the times that Zacchaeus had cheated them. He paid them back 4 times. This is called reparation, restitution. So it's a true conversion. Jesus doesn't leave people where they're at. He comes into their life. He treats them, notice, with such great kindness and respect and dignity. But he doesn't leave them where they are. He brings about their conversion and transformation. And Jesus says, today salvation has come to this house. For this man too is a descendant of Abraham, a child of God, one of the chosen people. For the Son of Man has come to seek and to save what was lost. What an amazing story. So I think we could summarize it by saying we have here the transformation of a soul. First we see Zacchaeus' desire that his worldly possessions were not satisfying him. He had a desire to see Jesus. He made the effort to try to see Jesus. Even when there was difficulty getting there, he persevered. He was willing to do acts of humility, to climb the tree, to be considered a fool for Christ. And because of that, Jesus invited himself into his house. As St. Augustine says, when we move towards God, God moves towards us. And so he then receives this great joy. He has his conversion. He gives half of his possessions to the poor. He makes restitution, even paying people back 4 times more. And Jesus says, today salvation has come to this house, for the Son of Man has come to seek and to save the lost. So think in your own life, is there anybody that you can show an extra kindness to, maybe a neighbor, a relative, a friend? Treat them, of course, with great respect, with great dignity. That is the model that Jesus gives us, to treat people with respect, with kindness, with dignity, and that through that kindness, that love, we pray that they too will be converted like Zacchaeus.